Back live. The party continues. Our next guest, he is a YC alumni and a successful serial entrepreneur, having led several businesses, most notably Nifty, one of the most overfunded tech startups on Kickstarter. Well done. He studied aerospace, finance, Mandarin, and law prior to starting a career in blockchain. You could say he grew up with entrepreneurship in his blood. Both his parents were entrepreneurs at a very young age. Business discussions were a common occurrence over the kitchen table. Please put your virtual hands together for the CEO of Radix, Piers Ridyard. Welcome,
Chris.
And the virtual stage is yours.
Thank you. That was an amazing introduction. You were like, oh, it's going to be a brief one, and he absolutely nails a wonderful complimentary one. Hey guys, great to be here. I'm going to start immediately by sharing my screen so that you can see my slides. Let's start with just a bit about Radix. Radix DLT is the first layer one built specifically to service DeFi. This is going to cover basically what's happening in the crypto space right now around DeFi, what's happening with the DeFi industry, and sort of what's coming down the line in terms of scalability solutions and why they're going to be problematic going forwards. Obviously, I don't need to tell anyone here about the incredible opportunity that DeFi is representing right now. It is essentially already following an exponential curve. We at Radix view DeFi essentially as blockchain's killer application. It's the killer application for blockchain. And I will go through a bit more why we believe that. But essentially, we're seeing a huge influx of value. Over the last 90 days, $3.3 billion of assets have flown into DeFi. On current trends, we'll be seeing about 63 billion more assets flowing over the next 2 years, which is just an incredible influx of value for a technology and application whose time has come. The way we view it is as an unbundling of banks, specifically unbundling of financial products. And you can think of these as like the main functions that you see in investment banks and retail banks: borrowing, lending, trading, derivatives, but essentially built on a compatible by default infrastructure. Like, you can think of Ethereum as forcing compatibility between these products and services that are being built by competitor products. So if we've got Compound and we've got Aave, both of those represent using similar assets and offering similar services, but are essentially, I can intrinsically move my assets between both of those seamlessly and quickly. But not only that, I can move it from Compound and move it into Uniswap, and from Uniswap into synthetics. And fundamentally, it's that power. It's not just the user-to-user interaction, but the application-to-application interaction, that seamless ability to move funds between these products and services that is making this so powerful and is attracting so much value being drawn into this ecosystem. However, the future of DeFi is facing some key problems going forwards. We're already seeing this on Ethereum, right? Ethereum transaction costs are back near their all-time high. We can see it starting to touch the 100 GWay mark on average prices, and we haven't really seen this kind of activity and level sort of historically since 2017. But if we just look at the last 24 hours and the last 2 weeks, the most expensive transaction that came across Ethereum, and this is just gas fees, right? This isn't the value of the underlying transaction. It's just the gas that is used to do these operations, these smart contract calls. It's $190 was spent in the last 24 hours as the most expensive transaction cost. In the last 2 weeks, $2,513 was the most expensive transaction. And this is continuing to increase as we get more and more of these applications that are being built on top of these platforms and are essentially calling each other. And so that's Ethereum 1 right now. And we're already starting to groan under the weight of this cost of using the infrastructure. But that was already a problem when it was just kittens, when it was CryptoKitties and it was blocking up the Ethereum ecosystem back in 2017. Fast forward now, It's not just kittens anymore. It's real significant amounts of value being locked up into these smart contracts. $4.34 billion and counting. And it's not just user to user or user to smart contract interactions. That was what 2017 was. Each smart contract, each decentralized application was its own island, where essentially a user would come and interact with that single application and would get something back from it, like a non-fungible token in the guise of a crypto kitty, or it would be user to user, me sending some tokens to Bob or Alice. In 2020, what we're seeing now is smart contract to smart contract interactions. So people often talk about things like network effects and power laws, and the internet was characterized by this power law of users joining the network and the connection between users being powerful. DeFi is taking that one further. It's now the connections between applications that is creating these network effects and these power laws. And it's smart contract to smart contract interactions that are critical and key here. And you can look at that if you just look at something as simple as what is the movement of stablecoins in the ecosystem. And this is from Flipside Crypto, some analysis they did on Ledger, where they were looking at what the interactions between these different applications were, sort of between Uniswap and Kyber and Maker and Paraswap and 1inch and all of this kind of stuff. And what you can see is that a lot of these transactions are happening between these smart contracts, approximately about 50%. And since the snapshot was done, I believe it's increased significantly now that we have things like yield farming and other applications where composability of multiple smart contracts, multiple decentralized finance applications together starts to be really important, and essentially drives the traction, the use, the liquidity, and ultimately the amount of assets that is under management within decentralized finance. So composability is this key concept, and it's sort of key and core to DeFi, but it's also key and core to the problems that DeFi is facing. And these are sort of existential problems that are caused by the problem that we already have of creaking infrastructure in Ethereum. Like Ethereum 1 is already at capacity. If you go on gas station, you're at 100% gas usage for most blocks. And we've known this for a long time, and solutions are coming along or have been coming along for a long time, starting with things like EOS and then ending up with things like Hashgraph and Algorand and Cosmos and Polkadot and all of these sort of next generation protocols to try and solve this problem of scalability. But there's this intrinsic problem of composability, which isn't really being talked about and isn't really being addressed. So that's what I want you guys to leave this presentation with, having a sort of an intrinsic understanding of what we mean by composability as well. So the most common demonstration of composability or example of composability that's sort of been hanging around the community for a long time is the train and the hotel application DApp example, which is a very simple one. It's like, I want to book a train and a hotel room. But if I can't book the train, I don't want the hotel room. And if I can't book the hotel room, I don't want the train. Because if I either get both of them or neither of them. I want the composability of this to be atomic. I want both of them to happen or neither of them to happen. Because if both of them happen, if one of them happens and I'm left with a train ticket without a hotel room, then that's a bit of a pain in the ass. So this works very well and very nicely in Ethereum right now. There are some problems with how it's built, but ultimately that's what enables things like flash loans, and that's what enables things that are sort of driving the DeFi ecosystem today. However, the solutions we have coming down the road is the solutions to scaling is sharding. That's what Ethereum 2.0 is proposing. That's what basically all of these other layer 1 solutions that are trying to solve the scalability problem are proposing is, right, let's cut the network up into lots and lots of pieces, and then we can parallelize and make everything asynchronous so that we can make things go faster. The thing is that the way that they're making things go faster is fundamentally breaking this really important property of DeFi, composability. And ultimately, sharding in many ways makes this very, very difficult to do. And in many instances, things like flash loans, basically impossible. Or very expensive to execute. And the reason for that is because the way that shards work on everything from Polkadot to Cosmos to Ethereum 2.0 to Near to Hashgraph to Algorand, all of these approaches to sharding are completely asynchronous, which means that the thing has to execute. If I have two smart contracts existing on two different shards, everything has to execute locally before it's passed across to the other shard. Like on something like Ethereum, it's the beacon chain. On Cosmos, it's the inter blockchain protocol. On Polkadot, it's the power chain. But all of these approaches to this is execute locally first and then pass across the complete execution of state to another shard for the completion of the multi-step process. However, if I bought the train ticket on this shard and I didn't buy the hotel ticket on the other shard, what's going to happen now is I'll end up with a train ticket but no hotel room. And fundamentally, that means that composability ends up being a much more difficult, much more complicated thing to make happen in sharding. And this is why DeFi, a lot of DeFi applications that are looking at this really closely are like, wow, on Ethereum 2.0, we're probably going to have to move a load of our DeFi applications to the same shard, which just ends up going the other way again, where we end up being like, okay, well, everything's on one shard, so everything's congested again. We haven't solved scalability. We've just added another problem to the complexity of how the system works. But fundamentally, this approach to sharding also is what all of these other layer one protocols that have sharding have the problem of. And people often ask me at this point, well, what about layer two scaling? Like, that's coming down the line as well. What about ZK rollups? What about this ability to shift some of this off the layer one so that we can have more throughput off ledger and then push it back on? There's a lot there, and I don't really have time to unpack all of the problems with layer two in this call or in this presentation. But the sort of the high level is it's the same problem intrinsically of composability. Like I can't complete a call and also have that composed with another call in a different smart contract in an easy fashion on layer two, things like Matic and stuff like that. But I've also added extra complexity to it now, because what I've got to have is I have to have another network on top of my network, which has its own staking infrastructure and has its own way of doing transaction verification and its own security model. So when we're looking at the rolling out of layer two, like about the only example that we currently have to look at is what's happening with Bitcoin and Lightning and how long that's taken to roll out and how difficult that is. And that's just for very simple transaction rollups. As we're looking towards how are we scaling these applications, we are so far away from even having a good idea of how we can apply layer two to the complex idea of application composability for DeFi, that even if this is a solution that we can do long term, we are in a very early research stage of this. And so the likelihood of being able to have a layer two solution that is going to solve this in the near term for DeFi is very, very low. And this is a problem. This is a problem for the industry. This is a problem for the Ethereum ecosystem, because the Ethereum ecosystem is where all of this lives. And we've already had a crisis. On Black Thursday, we had this event that caused a huge amount of congestion on the network at the exact inopportune moment for MakerDAO, and ended up basically causing all of these liquidations at like well below market value. And that was in large part to do with the congestion on the network. And this congestion is going to cause more and more of these knock-on effects as the DeFi ecosystem expands and as the stakes increase for that problem. And the reason that these approaches are flawed is because we're trying to solve today's problem with yesterday's solution. Yesterday's problem was transaction scalability. Today's problem is application and inter-application scalability. And fundamentally, like, it's good. The technology that is being applied to this, ZK rollups for things like transaction scalability, amazing. But it doesn't actually solve what is the driver, the underlying driver to DeFi, and what DeFi needs to be able to hit the next sort of $1 trillion of growth that we're sort of expecting it to over the next 10 years. So the Radix approach has been sort of to take a real good step back and go, well, how can we build a layer one protocol specifically for DeFi? Like, instead of trying to make this a general application ledger, this is clearly where product market fit is. This is clearly one of the most exciting areas of application on top of public ledgers, but it has a very unique problem set that needs to be solved to be able to actually deliver that scalability for the functionality that matters most to DeFi. So we sort of built this very simple set of technical requirements. It must not break composability, it must be linearly scalable, and it must work with multi-ledger assets. And these three requirements are requirements that have been engineered into Radix for a very long time. We've been building Radix for 7 years. Like, this is not something that we've just turned up and said, hey, wouldn't it be great if? This is something that has had a huge amount of engineering into it to start off on basic principles of how can you do these things in a way that allows the scaling of applications, not just transactions. And that sort of goes right back to the DNA of what the engineering approach for Radix was. And so, talking about must not break composability, Radix composability takes these breaks the problem into 3 sets. The first is, you need a state sharded execution environment. What that means is I need to be able to start off executing a smart contract in one shard and finish the execution in another shard. I can't have to execute everything locally before I pass that state across. That's not something that any other ledger in the world that we know of does. This is something that's fundamentally not possible at the moment with how Solidity is architectured, for example. So we had to start with a new state sharded execution environment that allowed the passing of state between shards. Second is deterministic data mapping. This is critical. Instead of going application-based data mapping, I want my application on this shard, I want my application on this shard. We map the data, like, given an input, I know where the data lives in the shard space, into the shard space, so that like operations are automatically grouped together in shard space and unlike operations are automatically ungrouped. This is fundamentally important to being able to do the next thing, which is synchronous multi-shard consensus. So every other ledger takes the approach of doing asynchronous multi-shard consensus. What Radix does to ensure composability can happen is you can stitch together multiple shards to come to a synchronous agreement so that you can solve the hotel and train ticket problem, so that either both execute or neither execute. And the same for DeFi as well. You can have multiple applications living on multiple shards, yet still not break composability on Radix. The second thing is scalability. Okay, well, now we've got synchronicity between shards. Doesn't that make it unscalable? Well, if you remember the deterministic data mapping, that fundamentally solves that problem, because what you're doing is you're only being synchronous on the things that need synchronicity between shards, and everything else is able to be asynchronous. And what is more, each node is able to process multiple consensus events in parallel. If they are not connected events, they do not need to be ordered versus each other. You only need relative ordering, not absolute ordering. This is something that Radix delivers, which means that multiple consensus events can be processed all at the same time on nodes on the network, providing this linear throughput. Essentially, as you add more nodes to the network, you're able to get more throughput, and you're able to both spread load across the shards, but also synchronize across the shards and the nodes that you need to without breaking the progression of the network. Super important concept. And the third thing is multi-ledger assets. There's $250 billion of assets that want to get into the DeFi space. And Ethereum DeFi ecosystem is only just scratching the surface of that. On Radix, we already have 137 of the top tokens already supported to be able to be moved into and out of the Radix ecosystem. So if you want to move Bitcoin in, if you want to move Ripple in, you want to move EOS in, you want to move Ethereum in, all of those things automatically supported. You can just bring those assets to the Radix ecosystem and use them instantly within the Radix DeFi ecosystem. We're also part of the Ren Alliance to have been able to fully decentralize this process. And lastly, and this is something that I'll be talking a lot more over the next couple of months because we have a few announcements about this, looking at how you can bring cross-ledger liquidity bridges. How can you allow liquidity to move between ecosystems, unlock liquidity that is currently locked up, and really start to push, again, more assets into the ecosystems that we care about? Because fundamentally, we're not building an island here. We're building a bridge and a system that can help take some of the burden off the Ethereum ecosystem and move it to a more purpose-built, function-specific ledger that enables the delivery and growth of DeFi without causing all of this congestion and problems. But ultimately, for a long time, these two ecosystems are going to be very close to each other. And we look really forward to working closely with the Ethereum ecosystem, as well as any other DeFi ecosystems that grow up, to make sure that we are servicing the market that we need. And this essentially goes into these three key aspects that we see as the drivers of growth, the drivers of traction in DeFi, which is access, liquidity, and choice. If you can increase the amount of assets you can bring to a public ledger and the ease of doing that, then you can increase the value that is represented in the user base on top of that ledger. If you can increase the user base and the value, then you can increase the liquidity, which is essentially the oil that is making sure that all of these applications run. And as you increase liquidity, you increase transaction volumes. As you increase transaction volumes, you reduce the cost of doing these transactions. As long as congestion is solved, you reduce the cost of doing these transactions, and that liquidity and transaction volume increase drives more applications wanting to bring their products and services to that ecosystem, which in turn drives more people that want to access the ecosystem in the first place. This is fundamentally what we see as driving every single successful DeFi ecosystem, and what Radix is 100% committing to delivering over the next decade. So if you want to find out more, please go to our website, radixdlt.com. We would love you guys to join our community, love you to follow us on Telegram, love you to sort of just get involved in our Twitter conversations. And if you're interested in getting tokens, those will be available soon. Please do go to our website and register your interest for tokens. Really looking forward to hearing from you all soon. Thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you so much for that, Piers. Really appreciate it. Tell me, first things first, would you be able to share your slides with the audience?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. One of the team members.
What's the best way of doing that?
Team members will get in contact with you.
Okay. Cool. Yep.
Or you could just on your left, you'll see there's a section that says handouts. You could upload it there.
Yeah. Okay. I'll do that now. Give me 1 second. I'll download it as a PDF.
I think there's a question from Jack. It's just tokens release date, exchange.
So token release date, exchange. Token release is currently on schedule for September. In exchange, the same timeline.